Asymmetrical Haircuts, Justice Update, with Janet Anderson and Stephanie van den Berg.
Hi, Steph.
Hi, Janet.
Hi, Molly.
Hi, Molly.
Hello.
Hi, Molly. And as the procedure goblin herself, Juliet McIntyre, says, fuck me. I did not see that coming. So, what's your headline tonight, Molly?
I think my headline was top UN court tells Israel to tells Israel to cease occupation of Palestinian territories.
What about you, Steph?
I had top UN court says Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories is illegal.
So what are we talking about? It's the International Court of Justice, which just made a really, really big set of legal interpretations on everything to do with the 1967 occupation of the West Bank, Gaza and East Jerusalem by Israel. Steph, what were they being asked to do and by whom?
They were asked two questions on the legal status of the Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories and the consequences of this occupation for Israel and for other states and the United Nations. And they were asked this by the UN General Assembly.
It's taken a long time, hasn't it? Now, Molly, you're our local expert on advisory opinions. What is an advisory opinion and what isn't it?
I would highly recommend that our esteemed audience go look to the entire podcast that I made about advisory opinions, which I have been told by legal experts is the best podcast that's ever been made about ICJ advisory opinions. Essentially, various UN bodies can ask their high court to weigh in on legal questions. They are not binding, but they do carry significant legal weight, I think, as one of our folks told us in the podcast, and can range from a whole sorts of topics. The ICJ has been a bit inundated. Advisory opinion requests. This is the first one that we're going to see. There will be two more, one on climate change and one on the right to strike sometime next year.
But the big deal a lot of people make about advisory opinions is that they aren't binding in the same way as some of the other stuff from this court.
Yeah, this is true. They're not binding like the ruling in like a contentious case. So when two countries go to court over some dispute, go to the ICJ over some dispute between them. But, I mean, they do carry a lot of legal precedent. I mean, it is the highest court in the world sort of giving its opinion on this. And, you know, in theory will impact a lot of other decisions, probably including the pending genocide case between South Africa and Israel.
Now, both of you were there at the court. Why don't you give us, the audience, a bit of a flavour? I mean, was it quite exciting? Was there a lot of sort of, we wonder what's going to be said, discussion behind the scenes? Steph?
I think at the beginning there was, because we were all wondering what could they say, but it wasn't as busy as we've seen the other cases, so it wasn't as busy as with the South Africa Gaza genocide case. But so it was mostly the usual suspects of journalists who cover all of this stuff. So it was mostly us amongst ourselves talking about what we expected. But it went fairly rapidly, and they started fairly rapidly really going into the meat of things. And then the big decisions came fast and quick. So quite quickly, I think everybody was already sending kind of snaps and urgents, or the kind of one line messages. Because they fairly quickly went into, you know, occupation is unlawful, settlements are unlawful, Israel should do this, other states should do that. So I think atmosphere was kind of relaxed at the beginning, but it sped up during the whole reading, because we were just like, this is all this and a little bit more than I guess what we expected, at least what I expected.
Yeah, I think... I was just going to say that, yeah, I mean, it was warm, because it is warm today in The Hague, and I think everybody was a little subdued, and then kind of as things got going, a bunch of us, myself included, sort of got a little overwhelmed, like what exactly is the headline here, because it feels like everything could have been a headline, basically. It was very comprehensive, I think, this opinion.
So there was a lot there to discuss. We can't do it all. So I'm restricting you guys to pick one major issue each that really kind of struck you that the judges dealt with. Steph, what's your big issue?
My big issue, I think, is, I think the most significant thing is that they found that this occupation is illegal. And that flowed from there is that they want Israel to leave the occupied Palestinian territories as rapidly as possible. So not immediately as some had wanted, but as rapidly as possible. And what they also, one of the conclusions they draw is that that also means that they have to evacuate the settlements that are already there.
And the big one that I chose was the apartheid one, because I think that was on some people's kind of scorecards of, we don't actually think the judges will go down that route, and it would be extraordinary if they did. So I thought that was extraordinary. What about you, Molly? What was your big one?
I mean, I think my sort of unending bugaboo about the court is when people say that these judgments are basically not enforceable, and that isn't entirely true. One of the things we saw today is that, the court was very clear that all other member states of the United Nations now have the legal obligation to not provide assistance or aid to Israel in the sort of work it is doing that has been declared illegal. And so I think it's kind of the most important in terms of practicality is that, lots of other countries now are going to have to rethink sort of trade agreements and these, the way that they are providing military assistance and this sort of stuff as we go forward.
Just to make sure everybody knows that we were actually paying attention to all the individual details, here one by one are 3 clips of the ICJ President Salam saying his stuff. Here's the first one, which was apartheid, and he mentions here CERD, which is the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, which also includes a section on apartheid as being racist, and the states who've signed up to it agreed that it should be eliminated. Here he is.
The court observed that Israel's legislation and measures imposed and serve to maintain a near complete separation in the West Bank and East Jerusalem between the settler and Palestinian communities. For this reason, the court considered that Israel's legislation and measures constitute a breach of Article 3 of CERD.
That is indeed the famous Article 3. So that's why he says it's in breach of that. Article 3 specifically references racial segregation and apartheid, which made it very confusing when you're following the case yourself and I don't know all the articles of CERD by heart.
I'm disappointed.
To figure out exactly, because he didn't say it's apartheid, but he kind of did say it by saying this breach of Article 3. But then you have to be so into your articles of treaties. And I don't have every treaty, my article memorized in my brain.
And here's the president also then with the key quotes on the occupation itself. And he was speaking at this point and at the next little clip as well through a translator, so you'll hear a different voice, a female voice.
With regard to the court's finding that Israel's continued presence in the occupied Palestinian territory is illegal, the court considers that such presence constitutes a wrongful act entailing its international responsibility. It is a wrongful act of a continuing character which has been brought about by Israel's violations through its policies and practices of the prohibition of the acquisition of territory by force and the right to self-determination of the Palestinian people. Consequently, Israel has an obligation to bring an end to its presence in the occupied Palestinian territory as rapidly as possible.
And finally, here's your one, Molly. This is the one on state obligations.
Taking note of the resolutions of the Security Council and General Assembly, the court is of the view that member states are under an obligation not to recognise any changes in the physical character or demographic composition, institutional structure, or status of the territory occupied by Israel on the 5th of June 1967, including Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, except as agreed by the parties to the conflict through negotiations, and to distinguish in their dealings with Israel between the territory of the State of Israel and the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967.
I only picked a short bit of that, but he went on to say after that that it included these obligations, the issue of diplomatic missions. and also that, or you've already mentioned, Molly, that states should take steps to prevent trade or investment relations that assist in the maintenance of the illegal situation. I mean, for me, that just has so many implications.
I mean, I think I made this joke on Twitter that, like, the ICJ in this part of it was sort of subtweeting, and then tried to come up with what do you call it when, like, when they're making a pointed comment at particular countries, because I think in this case a lot of that is directed sort of at the United States and Germany. I kind of liked the phrase subhegging, but this is still a work in progress, so I'm open to advice from the listeners. But yeah, I mean, this has like really far-reaching consequences.
Why would you say Germany?
Well, because of course Germany has it was announced earlier this week that, it's been rumored earlier this week that Germany is sort of backing this move to try to get the ICC to drop its investigation in Israel, and it's kind of been seen as like a big supporter. I mean, Nicaragua also brought this case that had to do with weapons, arms sales to Israel. I mean, I think Germany has been, for obvious historic reasons, a big supporter of Israel, and I think that, this ruling will have a lot of impact on, if they followed it, would have a lot of impact on how Germany conducts its foreign relations.
Steph?
Yeah, I think that's the main crux of this ruling, because we know from the earlier 2004 wall ruling that ordered Israel to take down the separation wall with the West Bank and stop with illegal with settlements, that they didn't do that. So we can safely assume that Israel's going to ignore this like they did before. But what is really going to matter is these kind of supporters of Israel who keep saying that they find international law important and Israel should uphold international law. And they now have a very clear ruling from the top UN court, which kind of cements some of these legal questions, I think also partly into customary international law. And it says very clearly that what Israel is doing is illegal and you shouldn't help it. I mean, it's hard for those governments then to argue that there is some kind of gray zone. All of the gray has kind of been taken out by this ICJ ruling. So if you say that you want Israel to uphold international humanitarian law and you look at this ruling, it's obvious that it's not. So what are you going to do now? I don't know how much, this is going to be a lot debated and political, and yes, it's non-binding. But it's very hard for these states to uphold now that Israel is somehow upholding international law.
Well, the main thing that I'm thinking about for the future is that we're going to get a ton of legal commentary from in our world on this. This is going to kind of bury us, I think, in terms of everybody's interpretation over the next week or so.
Yeah, so much for any sort of summer reading goals.
Yeah.
Where I think we're all just going to be reading takes on the ICJ.
Sorry, Molly.
One of the things I noticed that a lot of this might bleed over into the ICC case, but one of the things I found interesting also, as Molly mentioned, this German intervention and this UK intervention in the ICC arrest warrant situation, where they argue somehow that the Oslo Accords, Palestinians signed over some jurisdiction at the Oslo Accords so that the ICC can't have jurisdiction. But the ICJ today ruled that the Oslo Accords, in the sense that they sign over certain rights that the Palestinians have a right to, don't really apply. So there you have a very kind of, and I'm sure there will be legal experts who are now shouting at their phone or however they listen to this podcast and will probably be added about this. But I think that is probably something I would have to read back, and I assume that that's going to make an appearance in this legal challenge to the arrest warrants.
Yeah, I think you're right. Okay, both of you are heading different directions, so I'll leave you to it, and I'll be left with doing the editing, and see you again next podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, see you for the next one.
This was Asymmetrical Haircuts, your international justice podcast, created and presented by Janet Anderson and Stephanie van den Berg. Music is by audionautics.com. And you can find show notes and everything about the podcast on asymmetricalhaircuts.com. This show is available on every major podcast service, so please subscribe, give us a rating, and spread the word.
If you'd like to support this podcast, please check out our Support Us page at asymmetricalhaircuts.com.
Yes, do buy us a coffee on Patreon. That way you also get to hear our special War Criminals Book Club recordings with our fellow international justice reporter, Molly Quell.
He steadfastly insisted that he was guilty, quote, only of aiding and abetting in the commission of the crimes with which he was charged, that he himself had never committed an overt act. And I think I could have written that sentence basically for every single defense of a suspect I have ever covered in any trial in any court for war crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity.
It's often a bit of a riot.
And sometimes it's a serious discussion about books, and sometimes not, and sometimes films. And we'll pick things that portray the worlds of international courts and war crimes.
And it's only on Patreon.
Come find us there.